But there are things out there that are put out there by the Satan that entice us away from the Word. And that's what proves us, that's what tests us, that's what drives us to either follow Elohim or not to. Now, to see if we love Him with all our heart and with all our soul, Yeshua was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And He said, Hear, O Israel, Yehovah, your Elohim, Yehovah is Echad, He is one. And you shall love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And He says there's another commandment just like it, that you love your neighbor as yourself. In Torah, in Deuteronomy, it tells us, Hear, O Israel, Yehovah Elohim, Yehovah is Echad, He is one. And in Leviticus it says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He was quoting out of Torah. Yeshua, as well as John, James, Peter, and Paul, all tell us that to love our Elohim is to keep His commandments. You know, people will tell you, and people tell me all the time, we're not responsible for all that Old Testament stuff. Okay? Paul says that all Scripture, this is kind of a tricky question, all Scripture is good for teaching, reproof, correction. What Scripture is he talking about?
He's referring to the Old Testament.
He's talking about the Torah.
Yeah.
He's talking about the prophets. He's talking about the writings. Yeshua never once quoted Paul. Never once did he quote 1st or 2nd Corinthians. We have a problem on both sides. Okay? Judaism, like I said, we have the Torah, but we don't pay any attention to the Torah because we have the Talmud. The Talmud, Shulchan Aruch, will tell us that when we go to put our shoes on, we put our right shoe on first, then put our left shoe on, then tie our right shoe, then tie our left shoe. It's in there. It is in there. People in another province had a problem with it. They said, what do? We don't have shoelaces. And there was a midrash that says, in the case of no shoelaces, you put on your right shoe and then you put on your left shoe. Okay? But the problem we have is we have the Torah that tells us, listen, pay attention to, do what our Elohim has said, because He is one. We have to pay attention to the Torah. In Christianity, we have the same thing. We have Brit Hadashah, we have the Gospels that Yeshua said, do this. The Father says this. The Father says that. The Father says the other thing. Over here in Torah, it says, Yehovah said, Yehovah said, Yehovah said. In the Talmud, it says, Rabbi Eliezer said, but Rabbi Judah wasn't good with that, so he commented on that, and Rabbi Ben Nasi set them both straight. Over here, in Christianity, we have Brit Hadashah, but then we have Paul. We have the apostles that wrote epistles to the assemblies that say what? Paul says quite often, do as I do. Do as I do. I command you. I commend you. Whereas Yeshua said, verily I say to you, but he could say that because his name is what? Yehovah is our salvation. The Father says, do this. What am I going to follow? And this is something we need to pay heed to. Yeshua went on to say in, I guess I should turn the page, that, well, I guess I should finish reading this, but after Yehovah your Elohim shall you walk, and Him shall you reverence, and His commandments shall you keep, and unto His voice shall you listen, and Him shall you serve, and unto Him shall you cleave. That is Elohim speaking. Okay? I mean, he's telling Moses directly, this is the way it's supposed to be. Pass it on. And he goes on to say in verse, in mine it's 6, I guess in yours it's 5. And that prophet or dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken perversion against Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to draw you aside out of the way which Yahuwah your Elohim commanded you to walk in. So shall you put away the evil from the midst of you. But we're not going to go around killing prophets. But put away the evil from the midst of you. We have to be able to rightly divide the word. And this is something that Paul has to say that is very relevant to everything. He says, study. King Jimmy says, study. The Aramaic says, study. Everybody else says, be diligent. We can combine them and say, study diligently to show yourself approved. Then we won't be ashamed when we come before the Master, because we were able to rightly divide the word of truth. It makes sense. I'm responsible. Yeshua gave me the ability to be responsible because he shed his blood at the top and created a renewed covenant that would have been lost because of rebellion. Anyway, so how often do we all hear that Old Testament stuff? We've talked about that. We are saved by Jesus. What then did our Master Yeshua say? Yeshua goes on to, in these verses, Matthew 24:11, 12, 24:24. My son told me not to forget to throw in chapter 7, but chapter 7 says, beware of prophets that are dressed in sheep's clothing, but they're actually ravenous wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. But what Yeshua is talking about this is that there will come prophets, or there will be false Christs who will preach a doctrine that goes contrary to the word and will lead many astray. He says, be careful for these. He goes on to say that many will wax cold because of this. We have a lot of people on both sides that have a cold relationship. Secular Judaism is huge. You have a lot of Jews that are atheist, agnostic. They make it to shul, they make it to synagogue one time a year on Yom Kippur, because, you know, it's kind of like Easter and Mother's Day in the Christian, you know, in the Christian world. Well, you know, we buy a dress, we go to church on Easter. Or we go to church on Mother's Day because, you know, Mama's got to look good. But Christianity is the same thing, that we have false prophets over here. How many times do you hear, I'm prophet so-and-so, and, you know, and end time this and end time that, and distracting us, taking us away from the Word, and teaching things that are irrelevant to our walk. You know, we have to walk here and not worry about all this other fluff. And the same thing in Judaism. There have been a number of messiahs in Judaism. I mean, I can think of Bar Kokhba back in the rebellion around 135 when the temple, around the time the second temple was destroyed. We have Sabbatai around the 15th, 16th century that was said to be a Messiah. He was Hasidic and drew a lot of people in with this Messianic thought, and then he converted to Islam. Yeah, go figure. We have, well, recently, we have Menachem Mendel Schneerson. People know him as the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe from Brooklyn Heights, New York, that died back in '92. It was said that he was the Messiah. And the Hasidim today still say that he was the Messiah. Okay?
Based on what?
Huh?
Based on what?
Based on the things that he did to bring Russian Jews out of bondage in Russia, and he liberated them, and this is.
But he didn't fulfill the Messianic.
He did not
prophecies.
fulfill the Messianic prophecy, and he didn't fulfill.
Okay.
Yeshua is not accepted as Messiah by the Jewish people because of what is written in Talmud. Even though Talmud talks about Yeshua, it doesn't mention him by name, but it talks about It establishes that there must be fair trial practices and there cannot be false witnesses because of, and I forget the name they use for them, but this happened and we are not going to let this happen again. It talks about his crucifixion in the Talmud, but it doesn't use him by name. So, but there are guidelines to what Messiah should be. He's going to liberate Israel. He's going to establish world peace. Everything that we read in Christianity that the Antichrist is going to do is what is written about Messiah in the Talmud. Whereas in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, we get a different picture. That he is going to come as a servant. That he is going to teach us mercy. And he is going to bring us clarity to the Word. And he is going to be our salvation. And it says clearly that he is going to shed his blood for our transgressions. That is what Torah, the prophets, and the writings have to say about what Mashiach is going to do. But we're too distracted with Talmud. We're too distracted with what Paul has to say, to consider what Yeshua has to say. It's not a bad thing to keep in mind what Paul has to say, because Paul does the same thing that the Talmud is supposed to do, is simply to add a commentary. It's not supposed to be the main thing in the Torah be the commentary, just like Paul is not supposed to be the main thing, and everything that Yeshua said is the commentary. And that's where we get lost, because we try to understand the things that Paul is talking about. And we can't understand the things Paul is talking about unless we understand the things that Yeshua is talking about. And Yeshua is talking about the things that the Torah says because he came to bring it clarity. Paul was an extremely well-educated Pharisee. He was a rabbi of rabbis. He was well-versed not only in Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. He was also well-versed in what's called halakha, which became the Talmud over a period of times. He was well-versed in esoteric writings, the mysticism of the times, and he incorporates all this into his writings. Peter says that the writings of Paul are difficult to understand. If they're difficult for Peter, who spent 3 years with the Master, then they're difficult for somebody who hasn't bothered to study anything to understand. And we take a lot of the things that Paul says out of context and we build doctrines around them. And the next thing we know, we are over here as opposed to being right here. The same thing in Messianic Judaism. It's kind of a new thing. You stand on all this Jewish stuff, okay? And you get so dragged into Talmudic ideas that you start to stray from Torah, you start to stray from Brit Hadashah, the writings of Yeshua, or the teachings of Yeshua, and you end up sliding down the hill over here. Both of these things affect our relationship. But what he's getting at is there's going to be a lot of falsehood and a lot of things that are taught, which takes us back to our original premise that we are responsible for keeping up with it. We're responsible for studying to show ourselves approved. Now let's see. So Yeshua said that there would be false Christs and there would be false prophets. He was very clear when he said that he was very clear when he said that he did not come to dismiss the Torah, but rather to make it clear. And he went on to say that until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or the smallest mark will be removed from it. Then he went on to say that anyone who teaches otherwise will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. And anybody who sticks to the Torah will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Yeshua and the apostles all teach us that to love Elohim and to keep his commandments and from the scripture that we just read, not to add to it or take away from it. So we have to keep His word, and we have to follow the word, and we have to pay attention to it. The blood that was shed gave us the mercy and the undeserved favor to be able to do exactly what this tells us to do. Now, in Devarim 13:7-11, I'm not going to read it, but it talks about if your mother, your father, your second cousin teaches you something contrary. In Devarim it says they're to be put to death. That's kind of extreme, but we see the severity of paying heed to the word. Yeshua, like I said, the blood of Yeshua allowed us the redemption. It allowed us to be able to make teshuvah. Now, we keep all that in mind. Okay? Not to be distracted. We are responsible for keeping up with what the Word says. We are responsible for applying it to our lives. We're responsible for walking here and trying not to get sucked in on either end. Is it wrong to be a Christian? No. Absolutely not. You know? But be a Christian that walks according to the Word. Is it wrong to be a Jew? No. But be a Jew that walks according to the Word. And you'll find that you're neither, because you are a believer that walks according to the Word and the salvation of the most powerful entity in existence and beyond, and that you are striving to stay on the narrow path. That's the first idea that I wanted to present. I say it's kind of topical, there's no real depth to it, but we're in Elul. We need to be thinking about these things, because we're coming to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a time where we remember the giving of the Torah at Sinai, right before Yom Kippur and the whole unfortunate golden calf thing. But say, it's not just Elul. For us, yeah, we're going to take some special time to think about it and consider it before we come to the Feast of Trumpets. But we should think about it 365 days a year. Am I on course? Now, we go to Numbers 33 verse 16, and it's actually 33 verse 16. So, and we're going to come to another stop. It says, and they journeyed from the wilderness of Sinai and pitched at Kibroth Kata-Ava. And we could read, like we said, we could read the book of Numbers and go through all these stops and be bored to death by the time we got to the end of it. Every stop, as we've learned, well, those of you who have been here, means something to us. And this one is very, very symbolic for us, especially now during the month of Elul. We've just discussed the blessings in keeping the word of Elohim, and we've considered the consequences of following other deities, changing the Torah, and being seduced by false prophets. In Kibroth Hata'ava, it means graves of lust. And this is where straying and not making teshuvah leads. Okay? In verse 16, based on what we've considered in previous studies, we know that we are moving forward. Okay? When it says in the word for journey is actually a Hebrew word that means to move forward. That we have grace and mercy and favor. When we see the word pitched, means encamped, it comes from a word chanan, which means to have favor, to have mercy. But now we're in a word that means graves of lust. How does that fit in with our journey so far? We found out in our journey so far that we have left Ramses. Ramses was an Egyptian pharaoh. Ramses means the sun god. So we have left a situation in our life where we are God, where we shine our own light. We shine our own light. We walk in our own light. We've left that ideology behind when we leave Egypt. Egypt comes from Mitzarim, from Mitzor, which means a city under siege. We've left the bondage that comes with saying, I am my own God.